Winterfell's walls had never looked so high or stark as they did on that late autumn afternoon, when the sun hung pale in the sky, casting long shadows through the ancient courtyard. Ned Stark stood in the cold yard, wearing a thick gray cloak of wool and fur, gazing up at the towers and battlements. He could feel the bite of the northern wind in his beard, see the swirl of red leaves fluttering from the weirwood in the gods' wood beyond. Winter was coming, as it always did, but something else stirred in the cool breath of the day, some secret that had lain dormant, hidden beneath the stone and ice of the north for centuries. He could sense it in the marrow of his bones, though he did not yet know what it was. A raven had arrived that morning from the wall, bearing news of uneasy sightings beyond the frost-rimed forests, rumors of dire wolves howling in the dark, even of shadows that walked under moonlight. A few words of the letter repeated in his mind. Something stirs in the deep. Ever the dutiful warden, Ned had read the message with concern but not alarm. Troubled times were not new to the north. He had learned to keep a steady head, never to leap to dread without good cause. But as the day grew older, and evening threatened with its long shadows, an unease dogged his steps. That evening, after he had dispatched his steward with instructions for rations and supplies to be sent to the night's watch, Ned found himself unable to sleep. The wind in the window shutters rattled as though an unseen hand knocked upon them. He rose from his bed, careful not to wake Catelyn, and dressed himself in a thick woolen robe, pulling a cloak over his shoulders. The corridors of Winterfell were dark and silent, the torches having long since guttered into smoky trails. Only the faint glow of moonlight guided his way. He did not know precisely where he was going. It was as if some unseen force beckoned him. Each step led deeper into the older wings of Winterfell, those that had survived the countless expansions over the centuries, since Bran the Builder's time. The walls here were older than memory, carved from stone rumored to have been dragged from quarries far to the west. The floor was uneven, the torch brackets rusted. At length, he paused before a door no one had opened in years. He was certain of it. A thick patina of dust dulled the iron hinges, and cobwebs draped a corner like a neglected tapestry. The door was locked, but Ned found an ancient iron key among the ring he kept for only the oldest locks in the castle. It creaked ominously as he turned it in the lock, the sound echoing in the deserted hallway. With a small shove of his shoulder, he pushed the door open and coughed as a swirl of dust rose to meet him. A hidden stair descended into the darkness. He lifted a lantern from its hook outside and lit it with practiced motions. Light flickered over cold stone steps spiraling downward, deeper than he expected. Winterfell was known for its crypts that ran beneath the castle, but this did not lead to the crypts he knew so well. This was different, and he wondered if even old Nan had tales of this place. The damp chill intensified as he ventured lower. Each step seemed to lead him centuries into the past, the walls grown thick with moss and pale fungal growths that glowed faintly in the lantern light. Drips of water echoed, the lonely music of the dark. At times, Ned ran his hand along the wall to steady himself, feeling the stone's clammy surface. Something ancient had thrived here in secret, left to linger beyond the reach of men's eyes. Eventually, the stair opened onto a small chamber. He stepped inside, lifting the lantern high to survey the place. The space was circular, with walls carved in swirling patterns that made him think of the old Valyrian artistry he had once glimpsed in King's Landing, only more rugged, more weathered by the centuries. The air held a faint tang of sulfur of old ashes. Dust stirred in eddies beneath his boots. At the room's center lay a low stone pedestal, half broken. Ned approached cautiously, half expecting to find old bones or the rusted remains of weapons. Instead, he found something hidden beneath a tattered cloth, so old that it crumbled when he touched it. Beneath that cloth, nestled in carefully wrought indentations, were three large, oval forms that looked like petrified stones. Yet the swirling colors on their surfaces were more vibrant than any dull rock. One was a deep, dark green, reminiscent of the pine forests of the north. Another a pale, icy blue, glinting like winter crystals, and the last a swirling black flecked with gray, as though forged from living shadow. Ned's heart pounded in his chest. He had never seen such artifacts in person, but the songs of old told of them. Dragon eggs from the days when the Targaryens held sway over the continent. Valyrian dragon eggs. Impossible, some part of his mind said. They were lost to time, or hoarded by the last scions of House Targaryen who had once ruled from the Iron Throne. But here they were, unmistakable. The swirling patterns, the ridged shells, the lingering aura of power that prickled his skin. These could be nothing else. He stood for a long moment, wrestling with the urge to close his eyes and see if this was some fevered dream. But the cold stone beneath his feet and the weight of the lantern told him it was real. Why would such an object, 3 such objects, be here in Winterfell, hidden in a chamber untouched for who knew how many generations? He ran his fingers over the green egg's shell. It was shockingly smooth, as if the lines of scales were carved by a master craftsman. Yet it felt cold, lifeless. There were stories that dragon eggs, if not kept in searing heat or awakened by Valyrian sorcery, could remain dormant for countless centuries. Could these be only pretty relics, petrified lumps of history? Or did they hold the potential for life, for flame and flight? Ned set the lantern carefully on the ground, producing a small pouch. He covered his hand with a cloth before lifting each egg in turn, marveling at their weight. He arranged them gently within the pouch, patting them with leftover scraps of the old cloth so they would not knock against each other. Then he rose, a solemn sense of purpose descending upon him. He could not leave these eggs here in the dark. They belonged to an older age, one that had nearly destroyed Westeros with fire and blood. Yet there was something in him, perhaps the old, secret respect for the Targaryens that many Northerners still held for their forging of the 7 kingdoms, that told him these were more than historical artifacts. They were a key or a sword waiting to be unsheathed. They were dangerous. He stepped back into the stairwell, carefully shutting the door behind him. The cloying darkness weighed upon his shoulders all the way back to the corridor. By the time he emerged, his lantern was sputtering. He extinguished it and made his way through the corridors to his private solar. There, he took a moment to breathe, to settle his mind. The flicker of a single candle threw dancing shadows across his face as he set the pouch on a table, uncertain of his next move. Could he confide in Catelyn or Maester Luwin? Robert Baratheon was Ned's oldest friend, but the king hated all things Targaryen and would smash these eggs without hesitation, or try to. The notion of what to do weighed heavily upon him. He was not a man of secrets, but these eggs demanded caution. If rumors spread that House Stark possessed 3 dragon eggs, the realm would be aflame with curiosity, envy, and fear. Ned was a simple man, a man of duty, but duty here meant understanding the potential consequences of these relics. He decided to keep them secret for now. Exhausted as he was, he found no comfort in sleep. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the shutters, he at last rose, prepared for the day, and instructed a trusted servant to send for Maester Luwin. In the privacy of his solar, he revealed the eggs to the old Maester, whose wide-eyed wonder turned to cautious dread. "This is astonishing," Luwin whispered, adjusting his chain. "My lord, these eggs should not exist, or if they exist, they are known only in old Targaryen vaults. How came they to be under Winterfell?" Ned stroked his beard thoughtfully. "It's a question we cannot answer. Perhaps my ancestors found them during Aegon's conquest or some campaign after. Or maybe the Targaryens once entrusted them to the Starks for safekeeping. Regardless, my lord," said Luwin, "the power in these eggs, if they truly can hatch, it could bring dragons back to the world. Robert, his grace, would never allow such a thing." Ned replied quietly. "He would not. What will you do?" Ned stared at the eggs, their surfaces catching the morning light in subtle patterns of color. "I do not know, but I will keep them safe. For now, that is all I can do. Summon no one else, Maester. Say nothing. Let no one suspect." Maester Luwin bowed his head. "Your word is my command, Lord Stark." In the days that followed, Ned found his nights consumed by half-remembered stories of dragons scorching fields and armies alike. He remembered hearing, as a boy, that dragon eggs were sometimes placed in cradles with newborn Targaryen princes, a symbol of the house's heritage. He also recalled the cautionary tales. Dragons were not tame beasts, and their presence led to destruction as often as glory. But the eggs were here now, and their dormant power weighed upon him like a slumbering giant. One frosty morning, after checking on the rations meant for the wall, Ned made the decision to hide the eggs once more. He chose a different place, an old storeroom near Winterfell's hot springs. The heat there might keep them warmer than the frigid crypts. If there was any chance these eggs could stir to life, perhaps the warmth would be beneficial. He sealed the room, leaving only himself and Maester Luwin with keys. Life in Winterfell continued, and the realm moved onward in the slow turning of the seasons. Ned busied himself with the usual matters of the Lord of the North, dealing with disputes among bannermen, preparing for winter stores, and reading the constant flow of Raven's messages from around Westeros. Occasionally, he would take out a torch in the quiet hours of night and visit the storeroom. He did not know why, save that the presence of the eggs both comforted and unsettled him. He would touch the scaled shells and feel a fleeting warmth in his fingertips, though he could not say if it was his imagination or some latent spark within them. Weeks turned into months, and an air of foreboding began to settle over the north. Rumors of wildling raids trickled down from the wall. Strange sightings were reported by isolated villages. Lights in the sky, monstrous shapes howling in the woods. Always, the letters ended with a plea for help, for more men to strengthen the watch. Ned did what he could, though the king in King's Landing offered little support. Robert had other worries: the crown's debts, rumors of Daenerys Targaryen across the narrow sea, and his constant tension with Queen Cersei. Ned found himself wishing to be nowhere but at home, safe within Winterfell's walls, but the realm did not grant such tranquility to those sworn to guard it. In the midst of that cold winter's approach, Jon Snow arrived from Castle Black for a brief visit. Ned's bastard son had grown into a young man with a keen sense of honor and a certain quiet intensity behind his dark gray eyes. He carried himself with a solemn grace learned on the wall, though the older men of the Night's Watch spoke of his potential with quiet admiration. Jon was never one to boast, but Ned had heard enough to know that his boy excelled as a ranger in training, outdoing many older recruits. Jon's presence brought a kind of relief to Ned. He had not told Jon about the eggs. He had told no one but Luwin, but something about Jon's arrival set Ned's thoughts in motion. He remembered the old tales of Targaryens placing eggs in the cradle of newborns, how only those of Targaryen blood seemed able to bond with dragons. Yet the notion that Jon might bear some hidden Targaryen heritage was a secret Ned had guarded for years with the ferocity of a mother wolf. He had sworn an oath to his dying sister, Lyanna. Rhaegar Targaryen's trueborn son must never be revealed, not while Robert Baratheon drew breath. Late on a snowy evening, when the wind howled beyond the gates, Ned asked Jon to join him in his solar for a private talk. He did not plan to reveal everything, but some intuition told him Jon needed to see the eggs. Or perhaps Ned simply sought counsel, a moment of closeness in the midst of heavy secrets. Jon arrived, hair damp from the snow, dressed in the black cloak of the Night's Watch. His curious gaze flickered around the room before settling on Ned, who stood by the hearth with 3 dragon eggs laid out on a small table, swaddled in cloth. "Sit, Jon," Ned said quietly. "There's something I would show you, though I must have your sworn word you'll breathe no word of it to another soul." Jon's solemn nod told Ned all he needed to know. "I swear it, father." Ned lifted the corner of the cloth, revealing the black egg first. It looked like living shadow under the flicker of the flames. The ridges glistened with a subtle silver sheen. He watched Jon's eyes widen. A quiet awe spread across his face. "Are those?" Jon's question hung unspoken, but the meaning was clear. "Aye, dragon eggs, or so Maester Luwin and I believe." Ned studied Jon's reaction. "I found them hidden beneath Winterfell in a secret chamber. They must have been there for centuries, forgotten by all. None can say how they came here. Gods," Jon whispered, stepping closer, though he did not yet dare to touch them. "They look almost alive, Ned nodded. They do, and they might be. Or they might be nothing but stone. I have had them kept warm near the hot springs, yet still they remain cold to the touch, or so it seemed to me. Jon hesitated, then gently placed a hand on the black egg. His eyes fluttered closed for a moment, as if he felt something stir within. When he withdrew his hand, his brow furrowed. He looked at Ned, uncertain. It felt warm, a little. Ned's heartbeat quickened. He reminded himself not to reveal too much. That may be your imagination or some trick of the mind. Regardless, I wanted you to know they exist, if dragons were ever to return. He let the sentence hang, unsure what words could possibly complete it. But Jon lowered his gaze, as though grappling with a secret. The fire danced between them, throwing shifting shadows on the walls. Why show them to me? Jon asked softly. Ned looked at his son's earnest face, weighing his next words carefully. You have always been a man of honor and discretion, and I trust you more than I trust most. These eggs are a grave secret. If the king learned of them, he would destroy them or try to, for fear of Targaryens rising again. If the Lannisters learned of them, 7 save us from the cunning that might follow. Jon's expression hardened. We must protect them, then. If you wish it, I will help. Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. I do wish it, and I thank you. In the weeks that followed, Jon lingered at Winterfell longer than intended. Whatever reason he gave to his brothers of the Night's Watch, he found subtle ways to check on the eggs, ensuring their storeroom remained warm. He sometimes touched them, though never for too long. He swore he felt them pulse beneath his palm, like a distant heartbeat in the stone. But whenever he tried to tell Ned or Maester Luwin, they only nodded, uncertain themselves. As the winter deepened, a hush fell over the castle. The nights seemed darker than before, and the howling wind brought news of deeper chills to come. When at last Jon announced he must return to the wall, Ned and Luwin helped him pack enough supplies for the journey, along with hidden instructions for how to slip past curious eyes. Yet, on the eve of his departure, Jon did something unexpected. He returned to the storeroom alone, carrying a small brazier of glowing coals, an idea forming in his mind. Gently, he placed the 3 eggs in a circle around the brazier, letting the heat wash over them. He knelt there, alone in the dim light, and placed his hands on each shell in turn, murmuring words he could not fully understand. They were half-remembered from some old story, some half-formed memory. It felt absurd, yet a stirring in his blood told him not to stop. The black egg seemed to drink in the light, the green egg glistened like a deep forest after the rain, and the blue egg shimmered with an inner frost. His vigil lasted hours, until dawn's first gray light intruded. He felt a strange exhaustion, yet also a new vigor, as if something was shared between him and the eggs. He left them there, uncertain of what he had done, but convinced that if there was any chance of stirring life within them, it was through warmth and the presence of someone who cared deeply for them. When he took his leave from Winterfell, his thoughts remained behind in that dark storeroom. The weather turned foul shortly after he left, thick snowdrifts slowing his journey north. Even so, he pressed on, a flutter of hope inside him that the eggs might awaken, though he knew not what that would mean for the realm. Back at Winterfell, days turned into weeks, and the eggs remained still. Ned visited them less often, burying himself in the demands of the north. But late one night, not long after the snows had thickened enough to seal off many of the roads, a low rumble disturbed the castle. Many thought it an earthquake. Ned rushed from his chambers, a torch in hand, to the courtyard where the ground trembled. He saw no damage, only startled guards and wide-eyed servants. Then, just as swiftly as it began, the rumble died away. The castle fell silent once more. Yet Ned felt a tug on his heart, urging him to check the storeroom. He read and reread the letter, seeing his father's steady hand falter in the last lines. The gravity of the situation pressed upon him. He approached Lord Commander Mormont the next day, confessing only that urgent family matters required his presence at Winterfell. Mormont regarded him with his usual gruff wisdom, eventually granting permission to go, though he insisted Jon return as soon as possible. Rumors from beyond the wall were growing darker by the day. Jon saddled a fresh horse and rode south with Ghost at his side, the direwolf padding silently through the snow. A small retinue of black brothers accompanied him partway, but soon Jon rode alone, for speed was more important than numbers. Over frigid roads and through icy woods, past villages half buried in snow, he galloped. His thoughts raced ahead. What if the dragons hatched before he arrived? How could he help? When he finally arrived at Winterfell's gates, hoarfrost clung to his cloak, and Ghost was nearly invisible against the snow. The guards let him pass without question, for he was the recognized son of Ned Stark, if not in name, then in the hearts of the northern folk who loved him. He made straight for the Solar, where he found Ned pacing like a caged wolf. The 3 eggs lay in a wicker basket lined with blankets near the fire, each showing webs of fractures across their once impenetrable shells. "They've been cracking more each day," Ned said, voice taut with worry, "and the castle trembles sometimes, as if responding to their presence." Jon knelt beside the eggs. He laid his hands on each one and felt an unmistakable vibration, a heartbeat or something akin to it. "They are alive," he whispered, voice trembling. "Truly alive. How do we keep them safe?" Ned asked, stooping beside his son. "What if they hatch into beasts that devour half the castle? We know so little." Jon's mind spun with possibilities. He remembered old stories told by Maester or gleaned from dusty tomes in the Watch's library. How Targaryens used magic or blood sacrifice or the flames of great pyres to hatch dragons. "We might need more heat," Jon said. "And perhaps more than just fire. Some say a life given in sacrifice awakens them. But I don't want to see any blood spilled." Ned's jaw tightened. "We do nothing that requires the sacrifice of an innocent. We are Starks and the North remembers. We will not spill blood for dark sorcery." Jon nodded. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "We should build a great fire, Father. Here or in the courtyard or somewhere safe. I'll place the eggs in the flames." A flicker of shock crossed Ned's face. "Won't that destroy them?" "Dragon eggs cannot be harmed by ordinary fire, if the tales are to be believed. They thrive in heat. Let me try. If it fails, well, we lose nothing." Ned hesitated for a long moment. "Very well, but we must ensure secrecy. We'll do it in the old godswood, beneath the heart tree. If we're lucky, the walls of the godswood will hide the flames, and no one will see what we do." So it was decided. That night, father and son, accompanied by Maester Luwin, made their way to the godswood. A light snow had begun to fall, dusting the branches of the weirwood. The face carved in the trunk looked solemn and watchful, as if judging their intentions. Ned had arranged for wood to be piled in a small clearing by the hot springs that coursed through the godswood. The pile was tall and thick with kindling. Jon carried the 3 eggs in a thick quilt, feeling them writhe with faint tremors. He laid them gently among the logs. Maester Luwin lit a torch. He glanced at Ned, who gave a terse nod. The torch dropped onto the kindling, and soon flames began to lick around the logs. The 3 stood back, arms crossed against the chill, watching the fire grow. Sparks danced upward, and in the flicker, Jon thought he saw shapes coil around the eggs. Ghostly images of serpents, illusions conjured by the dancing embers. The heat intensified, the flames roaring higher. Ned shielded his eyes, concerned for Jon's safety, but Jon stepped closer, compelled by something he could not name. The cloak around his shoulders began to singe. Maester Luwin gasped, trying to pull him back, but Jon stood resolute, hands extended toward the flaming nest of logs and eggs. A low rumble grew beneath their feet. The weirwood's branches rustled without wind, as though the gods themselves stirred. And then a crack, sharp as thunder, rent the night. The black eggs split wide, releasing a burst of sparks. Jon took a step forward, ignoring the flames that licked at his boots, and peered inside. A tiny creature, black as night, uncurled its leathery wings. Its eyes glowed red, and a thin wisp of smoke curled from its nostrils. It let out a shrill, piercing cry that resonated across the godswood. The green egg cracked next, shards of shell falling away to reveal a hatchling with iridescent scales shimmering like summer leaves under sunlight. Its eyes were a deep golden green, and it flapped its wings experimentally, stumbling in the flames. The blue egg followed, releasing a dragon so pale it was almost white, with swirling hints of azure along its spine. Frost seemed to cling to its scales, and its breath exhaled in a chilling mist rather than smoke. All three newly hatched dragons writhed in the fire, mewling hungrily. Jon felt tears well in his eyes, overwhelmed by the wonder and terror of what he was witnessing. This was a rebirth of an age long past, an age of dragons that had shaped the history of Westeros. He wondered if he were unworthy, a bastard with no claim to greatness, yet here he stood with dragons newly hatched at his feet. Ned and Maester Luwin stood transfixed. The older men could hardly believe their eyes. When the dragons finally crawled clear of the dying embers, they skittered toward Jon, nuzzling against his outstretched hands. They were small as cats, though their wings gave them a fragile, ethereal appearance. Jon stroked the black one's head, feeling the warmth of its scales, seeing the faint glow beneath them. The green one let out a tiny hiss, butting Jon's palm, while the blue one gazed around, shivering, steam rising off its damp wings. Ned exhaled a trembling breath. "Gods be good," he murmured, crossing himself in the old northern way. "They are living dragons, alive." Luwin's face was as white as snow. This changes everything, my lord. The realm, if they learn of this." Jon cradled the black dragon gently, mindful of its sharp claws and teeth. "We must keep them secret for as long as we can. But how do we hide 3 dragons?" Ned's gaze fell on the walls of Winterfell. The hot springs beneath the castle keep it warm. They could survive in the deepest chambers, fed on scraps from the kitchens, trained if possible. But eventually, they will grow, and no walls can contain a dragon forever. The black hatchling let out a squeaking roar, eyes blazing like embers. Snow still drifted from the sky, settling on the black scales only to melt instantly. The green and blue dragons flapped their wings, testing them. Jon felt a pang of awe at how vulnerable yet powerful they were. When at last the flames died to embers, they carefully wrapped the dragons in heavy furs, carrying them back to the secret storeroom in Winterfell. Ned walked ahead, ensuring no guards were about. By the time they entered the storeroom, the hatchlings were trembling with cold, small tongues lolling out. Jon set them near a brazier. The black one crawled onto Jon's lap, snaking its tail around his forearm. The green and blue found spots to nestle in the blankets. Exhausted, they soon fell into a fitful sleep, their soft bellies expanding and contracting with each breath. Ned leaned against the wall, running a hand over his face. "We have awakened something that may change the fate of Westeros." Jon nodded. "I know." Then, a hint of determination hardened his voice. "But we did it for a reason. Dragons were once the guardians of this land as well as its scourge. If we can raise them to protect, rather than destroy, perhaps we can avert the darkness I've seen stirring beyond the wall. You've heard the rumors, Father, the others, White Walkers. If they return in force, maybe these dragons." Ned's eyes gleamed with a mixture of fear and hope. "We must tread carefully. For now, they stay hidden. No one but us and Maester Luwin will know of them. Robert must never learn. Nor the Lannisters." They agreed to that plan, though it felt fragile as spider silk. The next weeks and months would prove a struggle unlike any before. Winterfell was a busy stronghold, and many eyes could be prying. Yet, with cunning, they arranged for a few discreet modifications. The storeroom was deepened, connecting it to some hidden passageways near the hot springs, giving the dragons space to grow and warmth to thrive. Jon spent hours each day tending to them, feeding them raw meat from the kitchens. He would claim to go hunting with Ghost, returning with game that he fed surreptitiously to the dragons. Their appetites were insatiable. The black one especially seemed to have an unquenchable hunger for hot blood. The green one, more docile, accepted scraps of cooked meat when offered, The blue one grew more slowly than its siblings, yet its breath chilled the air, as if it carried the essence of winter in its lungs. Maester Luwin observed them with scientific fascination, making notes on their growth and behavior. He discovered that they were not harmed by the searing hot water from the springs. Indeed, they basked in its steam, seemingly absorbing the heat into their scales. Jon noticed that the black dragon liked to perch on the warm rocks, stretching its wings wide. Sometimes it let out small gouts of flame, practicing. The green would hiss and join in, exhaling smaller jets of fire. The blue one exhaled frigid mist, which froze droplets in the air. One evening, Ned visited them alone. The dragons had grown, each about the size of a large hound now, though more slender and sinuous. They regarded Ned with curious stares, but it was clear they had bonded more deeply with Jon. A wave of conflicted pride washed over Ned. These were creatures of House Targaryen, and in truth, so was Jon. He thought of his sister, Lyanna, her dying wish that Rhaegar's child be safe. He remembered the horror on her face as she begged him to protect her son from Robert's wrath. If the truth ever surfaced, that Jon had the blood of the Dragon Kings, would that mean he had the right or the power to command these beasts? The swirl of thoughts kept Ned awake at night, yet life continued in the north. The snows deepened further, and White Harbor wrote of too many ships trapped in ice, their trade crippled. The lords of the north murmured about sending envoys to King's Landing for more resources, though few believed the capital cared about their troubles. Ned carried on the heavy burden of governance, while Jon split his time between Winterfell and the Wall, each journey risking discovery of the hidden dragons. But the secret held as improbable as it seemed. Over the ensuing months, the hatchlings' growth accelerated. Their wings stretched wider, their bodies elongating, their scales hardening. The black one's flame was powerful enough to melt iron, though it required rest afterward. The green one soared in the vaulted spaces of the storeroom, gliding from ledge to ledge. The blue one learned to chill the water in the pools, creating drifting crystals that it batted around with playful curiosity. Jon realized he could no longer contain them indefinitely. They needed the sky, the open air. As they grew restless, their hissing echoed through the corridors at night, leading one or two servants to wonder about strange beasts in the walls. Whispered rumors of demons or shadow spawn circulated among the gullible. Ned had to quell the gossip, claiming there were large rats in the old passageways and that he was setting traps. At last, the day came when one of the dragons nearly escaped on its own. The green, which Jon called Verdant after the vibrant forests of the north, had found a weakness in the storeroom's ceiling that led to a disused tower. With a strong surge of its wings, it pushed open a half-rotted trapdoor and emerged onto the tower's roof under a pale morning sky. Jon, alerted by the black's frantic hisses, raced to the top of the tower, only to find Verdant perched on a crumbling parapet. The dragon spread its emerald wings, as if testing the wind. Jon approached slowly, calling softly. Verdant turned its head, regarding him with keen golden eyes. Then, with a leap, it launched itself from the parapet, gliding in a wide arc over the courtyard. Jon's heart thundered with equal parts terror and exhilaration as the dragon soared with surprising grace, all the while the folk below might see if they looked up. He prayed to the old gods that no one would. Most were busy with chores, eyes turned downward. The watchmen on the walls were often inattentive in the morning. Verdant flapped its wings, descending, and Jon scrambled down the stairs to guide it back into the hidden passage. By some miracle, none seemed to notice the winged shape overhead. The sky was overcast, and the dragon's flight was brief. That incident forced Ned's hand. "If they stay," he said to Jon, "they will be discovered. It's inevitable. People will talk." Jon nodded, stroking the black dragon's snout. "I know, but what choice do we have?" Ned exhaled, pacing. "We must plan carefully. If the realm discovers House Stark has dragons, it could spark war. Robert will demand their destruction. The Lannisters will see an opportunity for chaos. Even Stannis might claim we violate the king's peace. But if the White Walkers truly threaten from beyond the wall, these dragons might be our only hope." We need them to be safe, to grow strong. Jon thought of Daenerys Targaryen across the sea, of rumors that she might have dragons, though no one knew for sure. He pressed his lips together. We could send them north, somewhere remote, let them roam the mountains beyond the gift, away from prying eyes. But they won't survive the cold, will they? Ned looked at the blue dragon, which had begun breathing a misty chill. One of them might, he said with a half-smile. But the others? Maester Luwin cleared his throat. Perhaps we should consider taking them south, to the hidden valleys in the western mountains or the frostfangs in the far north, though I fear the cold there as well. Or even the lands around the Vale. But these are dragons. Could they not carve their own domain if given the chance? Jon's face grew determined. They need a caretaker, someone they trust. I must be that caretaker. Ned shook his head. You are of the Night's Watch now, sworn and cloaked. You cannot simply abandon your vows. A silent conflict flickered in Jon's eyes. He could not deny his oaths, but he also could not deny the dragons, which had bonded with him since their hatching. The Night's Watch vow is to guard the realms of men. Perhaps training these dragons is part of that duty, if they can be used against the threats beyond the wall. It's a risk, Ned murmured, but maybe it's the only path. They debated for days in hushed voices, until a second near-disaster arrived in the shape of a raven from King's Landing, bearing news of Robert Baratheon's forthcoming visit to the north. The letter was short on details, but it was rumored that the king wished to see Winterfell once again. That meant his entire retinue, Lannisters, knights, guards, courtiers, would flood into the castle. 100 or more pairs of eyes, any one of which could uncover the secret. Panic gnawed at Ned's heart. We have only weeks to prepare, Ned told Jon grimly. Robert's huntsmen are as nosy as crows. They'll find the storeroom if the dragons remain here. We must move them. Jon made up his mind then. I'll take them north, beyond the wall. Let them hide in the mountains near the Frostfangs, in those remote valleys where few men travel. The wildlings speak of hidden pockets of warmth, hot springs. They might manage. Ned looked pained. They might, but you'll be alone there. Jon did not flinch. I have Ghost, and I can find some among the Night's Watch who might aid me quietly. Besides, the wildlings rarely explore the highest crags. With the dragons, I doubt they'll be eager to chase me away. And if the others come, well, better to have these three up north, learning to fly and breathe flame, than locked away in a dungeon. After a moment's pause, Ned pulled his son into an embrace. You are a brave man, Jon, perhaps the bravest I have known. Your path is hard, but I see no other choice. So it was decided. By night, they guided the dragons in carts and on leashes of thick chain, though the chains were more for show, for none truly believed they could restrain a dragon if it chose otherwise. Jon led them out of Winterfell under the cover of darkness. A small group of loyal men accompanied them, each sworn to secrecy by Ned's personal oath. They traveled north on concealed roads, keeping to the shadows. The dragons grew excited by the open air, flapping their wings and stirring the night with shrill cries that echoed through the snowbound trees. Once they reached the wall, Jon used his knowledge of the Black Brothers' patrol patterns to slip the dragons through an unused tunnel. Ghost scouted ahead, ensuring no watchers stood guard. The cold beyond the wall was brutal, but the black and green dragons warmed themselves with their inner fires, and the blue ones seemed invigorated by the icy winds. They pressed on into the wilderness, determined to find a remote valley where the dragons could grow in secret. The journey was harsh and perilous. Jon's party encountered roaming bands of wildlings. One tribe attacked them, but the black dragon unleashed a gout of flame that scattered the attackers in terror. Another group simply fled upon seeing the silhouettes of the winged creatures overhead. Word would spread, but hopefully only as rumors of monstrous beasts in the far north. At last, they found a hidden gorge near the Frostfangs, its walls rising like jagged fangs to either side. Steam vents dotted the ground, providing unexpected warmth from the earth. Perfect for dragons. Jon smiled wearily. He could sense the excitement in the creatures. They roared, their voices echoing across the stones. Here they would lair far from the eyes of men, at least for a time. Jon set about constructing a crude shelter and storing the supplies they had left. The Black Dragon. He named it Umbra, for its midnight scales, seemed to delight in perching upon the highest crags, surveying the land like a king. Verdant, the Green, explored the steam vents, chuffing happily at the warm air. The Blue One, Frostfire, Jon called it, breathed chilling gusts on the snow, carving tunnels of ice to nest in. Jon marveled that these creatures were siblings, yet so different in aspect. The days turned to weeks, and they survived on hunted game. Jon taught the dragons to hunt as best he could. Verdant was the swiftest flyer, darting after goats and mountain hares. Umbra preferred to swoop at night, occasionally snatching an unwary creature that strayed too far from cover. Frostfire remained cautious in flight, but once it caught a scent, it could freeze its prey with icy breath. At night, the three would curl around Jon's makeshift camp, their combined warmth warding off the deadly chill. Ghost lay at Jon's side, ever watchful, though uneasy around the dragons at times. The direwolf seemed to tolerate them for Jon's sake. Far to the south, Ned Stark stood on the battlements of Winterfell, greeting King Robert and his retinue as they arrived in a thunder of hooves and banners. Robert grinned broadly, clapping Ned on the shoulder, but the old friendship was strained by the weight of secrets. Cersei Lannister's green eyes swept the courtyard, suspicious as a cat in new territory. Her children followed, golden-haired and watchful. No hint of dragons lingered in the air, but Ned felt the tension coil in him like a drawn bow. If any slip had been made, if any rumor reached the king's ears, all would be lost. Yet no slip was made. Robert left Winterfell none the wiser, complaining about the cold and praising the feast. The Lannisters too departed, an uneasy sense of calm trailing in their wake. But Ned knew the day would come when rumors from the far north would sweep the land. Whispers of winged terrors, breathing fire and frost, might reach the ears of every lord and lady in the Seven Kingdoms. What would happen then? For Jon, that question haunted his nights. Each dawn, he woke to the dragons curling around him, their wing beats stirring gusts of snow and ice, their roars echoing among the mountains. He felt a deep bond, an almost mystical connection that transcended words. He recalled the vow he had made when he joined the Night's Watch. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. Perhaps these dragons, awakened in Winterfell by fate, were meant to be a shield too, a living, fiery bulwark against the ancient evil stirring beyond the edge of the world. They grew quickly as dragons do. By the time the snows receded slightly, Umbra's wingspan was broad enough to cast a long shadow over the gorge. Verdant soared with agile grace, plucking deer from the high passes. Frostfire practiced breathing blasts of freezing wind that could crystallize entire patches of ground. Jon worried what might happen if their presence was discovered by the others. If a White Walker could slay a dragon, or if the dragons could incinerate an army of the undead. Legends clashed in his mind. The only certainty was that war loomed, a war that would dwarf petty disputes over the Iron Throne. One bitter cold morning, while scouting the perimeter of the gorge, Jon stumbled upon a small group of men in black cloaks, Night's Watch Rangers. They spotted him at the same moment, and relief crossed their faces. Among them was Samwell Tarly, panting and red-faced. Jon, the Lord Commander sent us. We've heard odd tales, and he wanted to see if you'd come to harm. Jon was torn between relief at seeing his brothers and dread that they might discover the dragons. He greeted them warmly, but his manner was evasive when they asked how he survived so long out here. Sam, ever observant, noticed clawed footprints in the snow, far larger than any wolf. Jon sighed, realizing there was no easy lie to conceal the truth. He led them deeper into the gorge, where the three dragons lounged near the steaming vents. Their presence was impossible to deny. One ranger reached for his blade, eyes wide in terror, but Sam grabbed his arm. No, if they meant us harm, we'd already be ashes. Fascination warred with fear on the rangers' faces. Jon explained as best he could how he had come to raise them. Half the story remained hidden. His father's role, the secret Targaryen blood that pulsed in his veins, but the essence was clear. These dragons were alive, hatched in Winterfell, and meant to stand against the nightmare to come. The men listened, stunned. Some murmured that the Watch should kill the beasts, citing old legends of Dragonfire. But Sam, forging an unexpected steel in his voice, argued that if the others marched south, dragons might be the only hope. Jon saw the conflict etched on the faces of his brothers. They had sworn oaths to protect the realm, and these monstrous, beautiful creatures might be crucial. At length, they agreed to return to the Wall and deliver a careful report to Mormont, leaving out certain specifics that would point to Ned Stark. Jon extracted a promise from them. No word would reach the king or the great lords of Westeros. The Rangers, albeit reluctantly, agreed. Fear of the others outweighed the fear of dragons in their hearts. And so a new age began, far from the knowledge of kings and queens. An age in which the last Targaryen scion, raised as a bastard of House Stark, nurtured the birth of 3 dragons in the frozen north. While lords and ladies quarreled over crowns and castles, while Robert Baratheon drank and feasted, while the Lannisters spun their webs of intrigue, a more profound change took shape beyond the Wall. Dragons soared again in Westeros skies, preparing for a war older than the 7 kingdoms themselves. A hush ran through the land whenever travelers claimed they saw winged shapes above the Frostfangs. Most dismissed such accounts as tall tales, but rumors spread all the same, carried by wildlings who whispered of a fire in the ice and the return of winged shadows. The free folk had no reason to keep silent, though many were too terrified to approach. A handful prostrated themselves, thinking the dragon's gods incarnate. Others fled. Jon did his best to remain vigilant. He patrolled with Ghost, taught the dragons to coordinate in hunts, tested the limits of their endurance. Verdant could fly the highest, Umber breathed the hottest fire, and Frostfire's icy breath could freeze a waterfall in an instant. All 3 grew strong in muscle and bone, a living trinity of the elements, forging a bond that transcended mortal concerns. Jon felt increasingly like an outsider in his own body, torn between the duty of the Watch and the primal call of the dragons. Their hearts beat with a fiery pulse that stirred some inherited memory within him. As the months rolled on, reports of undead roamers trickled in from the far north. Rangers disappeared, and the wildlings stirred in panic. Jon occasionally led the dragons on sorties against the shadows that moved at the edges of night. He learned the horrifying truth. The others shrank from dragonfire, evaporating in bursts of blue-white flame when confronted. But this was only the beginning. For every white or White Walker destroyed, more seemed to lurk beyond. The tide was rising, and the dragons were but 3. They would need time to grow, to breed perhaps. Jon prayed they would be strong enough when the final confrontation came. Word eventually reached Ned Stark, in secret letters carried by Rangers loyal to Jon. He read by candlelight in his solar, heart pounding at the descriptions of undead creatures falling to bursts of flame in the frozen wastes, or being encased in Frostfire's rime. The realm might never know how close it was to annihilation if these fiends were allowed to march unopposed. Ned felt a grim satisfaction that their gamble, hatching the eggs, hiding them, sending Jon north, had proved wise. Yet he mourned the quiet life Jon could have lived. The young man was now locked in a cosmic struggle at the edge of the world. Catelyn sometimes asked about Jon's absence, a hint of old resentment lingering in her tone, though softened by time. Ned told her only that Jon was on a special assignment for the Night's Watch. She did not press further, sensing how the matter weighed on him. But Bran and Arya, younger and more curious, pestered their father with questions about Jon, longing for news. They had no inkling of the dragon's existence. Ned kept that secret locked away, uncertain how to burden his children with such knowledge. Winter deepened into a savage season. Storms battered the north, forcing even the hardiest travelers to seek shelter. The others pressed closer, and the wildlings streamed south, desperate for refuge. Mance Rayder, the self-styled king beyond the wall, reached out to Jon with uneasy entreaties. If the rumors were true, if dragons soared in the mountains, perhaps a pact could be made. Jon, uncertain of Mance's motives, kept the dragons hidden. Yet it was only a matter of time before the free folk discovered the truth. News of the winged lizard's breathing death circulated among them like a bad omen or a potential salvation. One night, a starless gloom draped the Frostfangs, and a deadly chill crept through the gorge. The dragons, restless, roared at something in the sky. Jon peered upward, seeing only darkness, but a creeping dread spread through his flesh. Ghost's hackles rose, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Then, as if out of nowhere, an other emerged at the far edge of the gorge, flanked by half a dozen wights in tatters of cloth and rusted mail. Their eyes glowed an eerie blue. They advanced silently, weapons of ice in their hands. Jon shouted for the dragons. Umber took flight, unleashing a torrent of black fire that lit the night with a lurid glow. The wights shrank back, but the other raised a hand, conjuring an icy barrier that partially deflected the flames. Verdant swooped in from above, blasting the flank, setting the dead alight. Frostfire hissed from behind a boulder, releasing a breath so cold it crystallized the air, creeping over the ground like living frost. Two wights froze in place, their limbs snapping under the sudden chill. Yet the other pressed forward, brandishing a spear of pure ice. Jon advanced with longclaw drawn, heart hammering. He remembered the stories. Valyrian steel could slay the others. With a swift slash, he met the other's blade. The impact resonated with a sound like shattering glass. The other hissed, eyes gleaming with ancient malice. Then Umber dived low, jaws snapping. The other dodged, but the black dragon's tail whipped around, smashing the spear from its grip. Seizing the opening, Jon thrust Longclaw forward, piercing the other's center. It shrieked, a sound like cracking ice, then disintegrated into a swirl of snow and shards that melted away in the dragon's heat. The remaining wights collapsed, lifeless puppets without their master's will. Jon stood panting in the swirl of half-melted snow, the three dragons circling overhead, their roars echoing in triumph and fury. Ghost limped toward him, a shallow gash on his shoulder. Jon stroked the direwolf's fur, whispering calming words. This time they had prevailed. But next time the others might come in greater numbers, and not all battles would be so easily won. Word of the skirmish traveled south through the Night's Watch. Lord Commander Mormont, hearing how dragons had slain another, wrestled with disbelief and relief, with the knowledge that the others were vulnerable to dragonfire. A slim hope kindled in his heart. He sent messages to Ned Stark, cautioning him of the threat and praising Jon's unusual allies. All of these tidings weighed upon Ned with a sense of fate closing in. Winterfell's ravens carried secret messages to loyal bannermen, hinting that dark forces stirred, urging them to prepare. None mentioned dragons openly. Ned dared not reveal that. But perhaps, in time, when the threat of the others could no longer be denied, he would call upon the Northern Lords to unite behind the living flame that Jon commanded. For Jon, life in the Frostfangs had become a never-ending dance of vigilance. The dragons, now large enough to carry him for short flights, scouted the wastes in search of the others' movements. He soared on Umber's back, heart pounding with exhilaration as the ground dropped away beneath them. The black dragon's scales shone like obsidian under the watery daylight, eyes blazing with primal intelligence. As they glided across the pale snowfields, Jon felt a sense of destiny, as though every choice he had made, every sorrow of being a bastard, every vow of the Night's Watch, led him to this moment. Below, he saw columns of wights trudging across a frozen river, the vague outlines of white walkers guiding them. He saw tribes of wildlings huddled in caves, terrified of the growing darkness. He even glimpsed monstrous creatures that made his blood run cold. Giant ice spiders from the old tales, creeping at the fringes of the frost. But with dragons overhead, these horrors shrank back. Fire and ice collided in the silent north, and the outcome would shape all the lands beyond. Yet the Targaryen blood in Jon's veins, the Stark loyalty in his heart, And the raw power of the dragons were not the only factors in the equation. Far to the south, schemers in King's Landing sensed a change in the air. Varys's little birds whispered of rumors beyond the wall, of the Night's Watch encountering impossible beasts. Cersei Lannister dismissed such tales as nonsense, more worried about her family's hold on power. Robert, already drunk in his hunts and feasts, paid little heed. But others listened. Peter Baelish, Littlefinger, quietly set agents to pry for more details, suspecting that if the rumors were true, the political landscape could be turned on its head. Meanwhile, across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen might be hearing whispers too, perhaps stirring ambitions of her own. In the quiet gloom of Winterfell's Godswood, Ned Stark knelt before the weirwood, the face carved in its trunk seeming to regard him with timeless wisdom. Snow coated his shoulders. He prayed silently for Jon's safety, for the realm's salvation, for guidance in the storm to come. He remembered the moment he found the eggs beneath the castle stones, the fateful choice he made to keep them hidden, to share them only with Jon. How strange it was that those old stones had birthed a new era, forging a secret alliance between Stark duty and Targaryen fire. He felt the presence of the old gods, or perhaps only the echo of centuries within the heart tree. A whisper of wind passed through the red leaves, carrying a single phrase that might have been his own imagination. "He is the song of ice and fire." A chill ran down Ned's spine. He thought of Jon, his nephew by blood, his son by affection, forging a path no one else could tread. Stark and Targaryen, ice and fire, guardians of the realm in a time of mounting dread. Winter was coming. The others were on the move, but the dragons had returned to Westeros, hidden in the far north, thriving in the unlikeliest of places. Their roars would one day echo across the land, heralding either salvation or destruction. For now, Ned placed his hand upon the tree's ancient bark, breathing in the crisp air, exhaling a soft prayer. In the hush of the Godswood, he found a measure of resolve. No matter what came next, Robert's prying, the Lannister schemes, or the onslaught of the White Walkers, House Stark would stand firm, and the blood of dragons would burn bright in the darkness. Thus did the long-forgotten clutch of Valyrian eggs, hidden beneath Winterfell's foundation, hatch in secret and usher in a new age. The realm slumbered, blind to the inevitable confrontation beyond the horizon. But high above the icy mountains, 3 dragons rode the winds with a black-cloaked rider astride them, forging a legend that would outshine the old songs. And deep in Winterfell, Ned Stark kept faith with the memory of his sister and the child she had entrusted to him, praying that if any mortal power could hold back the tide of doom, it would be the fire of dragons and the steadfast courage of the North.